Welcome to Nightmare Lullabies. Here, we bring you chilling tales to keep you on edge while helping you unwind. If you enjoy our stories, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Got a creepy story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We might feature it in a future video. Now sit back, relax, and let the story begin. I had just about given up on dating apps when I came across his profile. His name was Daniel. He was attractive in that artsy kind of way, with a sharp jawline, a mess of wavy dark hair, and thick-rimmed glasses. His profile said he was a professional photographer, and his pictures were stunning. Urban cityscapes, golden sunsets, candid portraits of people who seemed almost too perfect to be real. His messages were charming, and he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. He asked about my favorite movies, my hobbies, even my childhood. There was something refreshing about him. He wasn't trying to rush into anything physical, and he seemed to appreciate me for my personality. So when he suggested we meet in person, I said yes. Daniel picked a trendy coffee shop downtown. When I arrived, he was already waiting for me, sitting by the window with a latte in hand. He looked even better in person, and when he smiled at me, I felt my nerves melt away. The conversation flowed easily. He told me about his passion for photography, how he loved capturing raw emotions and candid moments. Then he said something that caught me off guard. "You'd be amazing to photograph," he said, his eyes scanning me as if he were already framing a shot in his mind. I laughed nervously. "I'm not really photogenic." He shook his head. "No, you have this natural beauty. It's rare. Most people are so stiff in front of the camera, but I bet you'd be different." I blushed, unsure of how to respond. Before I knew it, he was inviting me to his studio for a casual shoot. "Nothing serious," he assured me. "Just for fun. You might even end up with a new profile picture out of it." I hesitated. Something about the idea made me uneasy, but he was so confident, so sincere, that I found myself agreeing. The following Friday, I showed up at his studio. It was in an old industrial building on the edge of town. The elevator creaked as it carried me to the third floor, and the hallway smelled faintly of mildew. His studio door was propped open, and Daniel greeted me warmly. The studio was smaller than I'd imagined, with blacked-out windows, a few photography lights, and a backdrop set up in the corner. The walls were lined with framed photos, portraits, landscapes, abstract shots. They were beautiful but unsettling. Many of the portraits had a haunted quality, as if the subjects were caught in moments of deep vulnerability or fear. "I don't usually let people see my studio," Daniel said, almost shyly. "It's my sanctuary." I nodded, feeling a little honored but also slightly on edge. He handed me a bottle of water and asked if I was ready to start. I took a sip and nodded. He directed me to stand in front of the backdrop and adjusted the lights. His camera clicked as he gave me gentle instructions. "Turn your head a little to the left." "Perfect. Now look up, beautiful." At first, it was fun. He made me laugh, and I started to relax. But as the shoot went on, his instructions became more specific, almost intrusive. "Let your hair fall over your face." "Yeah, like that. Now close your eyes. Imagine you're scared." I frowned. "Scared?" He smiled faintly. "It's for the mood. Just trust me." I tried to go along with it, but the air in the room felt heavier. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After about an hour, he suggested we take a break. I sat on a small couch in the corner while he fiddled with his camera. I glanced around the room and noticed a door slightly ajar at the back of the studio. "What's in there?" I asked. He stiffened. "Just storage." I nodded but couldn't stop my curiosity. When he stepped out to grab something, I approached the door and peeked inside. The room was dark, but I could make out shelves lined with boxes and equipment. And then I saw them, Polaroids pinned to the wall. My stomach dropped as I stepped closer. The photos were of women, all looking terrified. Some had tear-streaked faces, others had their hands tied. I felt a rush of panic. My hands were shaking as I tried to process what I was seeing. "What are you doing?" I whipped around to see Daniel standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I was just curious," I stammered. He stepped closer, his calm demeanor now replaced with something darker. "You shouldn't have gone in there." My heart pounded as I tried to think of an excuse. I think I should go. It's getting late." He blocked the doorway. "Why are you in such a hurry? We were just getting started." I forced a laugh, trying to mask my fear. "Maybe another time." His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought he wasn't going to let me leave. But then he stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. "Sure, Another time, I practically ran out of the building, not daring to look back. As soon as I got to my car, I locked the doors and drove home, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. Later that night, I tried to report him, but I realized I didn't know his last name or any details about him beyond what he'd told me. His dating profile had been deleted, and when I searched for his studio online, there was no record of it. It was as if he'd never existed. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't found those photos, or if he'd decided not to let me leave. But I know one thing for sure. I'll never trust a charming photographer again. Dating apps were never my thing, but after my friends insisted I give them a try, I finally caved. That's how I ended up meeting Chris. He was charming over text, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a few days of chatting, he asked if I'd like to go out for dinner. Hesitant but intrigued, I said yes. Chris suggested a trendy new Italian restaurant downtown. It was casual but classy, the kind of place that showed he put effort into planning the date. When I arrived, he was already waiting for me at the table, a wide smile spreading across his face as he waved me over. "You're even prettier in person," he said as I sat down. His compliment was smooth but sincere, and I felt myself relax. The first half of the date went well. We talked about work, hobbies, favorite foods, and all the usual first date topics. He was attentive and seemed genuinely interested in my stories, laughing at all the right moments. But then, things took a strange turn. About halfway through the meal, Chris started asking oddly specific questions. "So," he began, twirling his fork in his pasta, "do you live alone?" I paused, caught off guard. No. I have a roommate." He nodded, his gaze lingering on me a little too long. "That's good. It's safer, you know? The world's a crazy place these days." I tried to laugh it off, but the comment left me feeling uneasy. He shifted the conversation to lighter topics, but every now and then, he'd ask another strange question. "Do you usually tell people where you're going on dates? Do you use the same route to get home every night? Have you ever been in a dangerous situation before?" I answered vaguely, trying not to let on that I was growing increasingly uncomfortable. As the evening went on, Chris's demeanor became even more unsettling. He leaned in closer across the table, lowering his voice as he spoke. "You know," he said, "people can be unpredictable. You never really know what someone's capable of until it's too late." I forced a smile. "That's an interesting thought." He nodded, his expression serious. "It's why I always make sure I'm prepared. You never know when you might need to defend yourself." At that, he pulled out his wallet and showed me a small knife he kept tucked inside. "Just in case," he said with a wink. My stomach churned. This wasn't charming anymore. This was downright creepy. When the check came, I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment to collect my thoughts. In the bathroom, I pulled out my phone and texted my roommate, letting her know where I was and who I was with. I also Googled the restaurant's address to confirm where I was, just in case something went wrong. When I returned to the table, Chris was holding my coat. "Ready to go?" he asked. I forced a smile and nodded, all the while trying to come up with an excuse to avoid him walking me to my car. As we stepped outside, the cool night air hit me, and I shivered. Chris noticed and draped his jacket over my shoulders, which only made me more uncomfortable. "Your car's this way, right?" he asked, motioning toward the parking lot. I panicked, realizing I hadn't come up with a plan. Actually, I was thinking of calling an Uber. I had a drink earlier, and I don't want to risk driving. He raised an eyebrow. "You seemed fine at dinner. I can walk you to your car." I insisted I'd already ordered the Uber, and that it was only a few minutes away. He seemed annoyed but finally relented. "All right," he said, stepping back. "Text me when you get home, okay?" I nodded quickly and walked toward the front of the restaurant, pretending to check my phone for the imaginary Uber. Once I was out of sight, I bolted around the corner to my car and drove off, my heart pounding the entire way home. That night, I blocked Chris on the dating app and deleted his number. I couldn't shake the feeling that his questions and comments weren't just strange. They were calculated. Maybe he was just socially awkward, but something about him screamed danger. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I'd let him walk me to my car. After months of swiping through the dating app jungle, I thought I'd finally struck gold. Ben was his name, a photographer with a love for travel and an obsession with finding the best coffee in the city. His profile photos were a mix of scenic landscapes, artsy black and white portraits, and a few candid selfies that showed off his sharp jawline and confident smile. We hit it off instantly. Our chats were witty and engaging, and his voice messages made me swoon. After a week of talking, he suggested we meet in person. There's this great little coffee shop downtown, he said. Quiet, cozy, perfect for good conversation. The day of the date arrived, and I was nervous but excited. I spent extra time picking out an outfit and left early to make sure I wasn't late. The coffee shop was just as charming as Ben had described, with warm lighting and the comforting smell of roasted beans. I looked around for someone who matched his photos, but no one stood out. After a few minutes, I got a message. I'm running a bit late. Don't go anywhere. I sighed and ordered a latte, figuring he'd be there soon. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. I was about to leave when a man approached my table. Hey, are you waiting for Ben? He asked, smiling nervously. I frowned, confused. Yes, why? He sat down across from me without being invited. He looked nothing like the Ben I'd seen in the photos. This guy was shorter, heavier, and considerably older. I'm Ben, he said, his voice quiet but firm. My heart sank. This wasn't the man I'd been talking to. I tried to keep my composure. You don't look like your photos, I said carefully, not wanting to escalate the situation. He shrugged. Those are older pictures. People change. It was a lame excuse, and I knew it. You could have mentioned that before we met, I said, trying to sound calm. Ben, if that was even his real name, leaned forward, his demeanor suddenly shifting. What does it matter? We had a connection, didn't we? His tone made me uneasy. I glanced around the coffee shop, hoping someone might notice my discomfort. I think I should go, I said, starting to stand up. But he grabbed my wrist. Not hard, but firm enough to make my stomach twist. Come on, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Just give me a chance. You'll see I'm not so bad. I yanked my hand away, my heart racing. I don't think this is going to work, I said, backing toward the door. As I turned to leave, he called after me. You're making a mistake. You'll regret this. The whole way home, I couldn't stop shaking. When I got there, I immediately blocked him on the app and deleted our conversations. But the story doesn't end there. A few days later, I started getting messages from random numbers. They were vague at first, just hey, it's me. Can we talk? But then they got more aggressive. I know where you like to get coffee. You can't ignore me forever. I reported the messages to the police, but without a real name or proof of who he was, there wasn't much they could do. For weeks, I avoided the coffee shop and kept my phone on silent, terrified every time I saw an unknown number. Eventually, the messages stopped, but the experience left me shaken. It was a harsh reminder of the risks that come with online dating, and the importance of trusting your instincts when something feels off. After breaking up with my long-term boyfriend, I decided to try online dating. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just someone to take my mind off things and help me rebuild my confidence. That's how I met Dave. His profile said he was 28, a teacher, and into outdoor activities. His messages were sweet, and he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. What sold me was his kindness. He'd ask how my day was, and remembered the little things I told him. It felt like he really cared, and after a few weeks of chatting, he suggested we meet for a low-key dinner at a neighborhood diner. The night of the date, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. The diner was small and quiet, the kind of place where everyone knows each other. When I arrived, Dave was already there, seated in a booth near the back. He looked just like his photos, average height, dark hair, glasses, nothing unusual. The date started off well. We talked about work, hobbies, and random stories from our childhoods. He was charming and funny, but there was a moment when he mentioned something that threw me off. You've got a nice apartment, he said casually, cutting into his steak. I froze. I hadn't told him where I lived. How do you know where I live? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Dave didn't miss a beat. Oh, I saw it when I was driving through the neighborhood, he said with a smile, as if that explanation made perfect sense. I didn't push it, but a nagging feeling settled in my stomach. Something about his answer felt rehearsed. After dinner, he offered to walk me to my car, and I agreed, not wanting to be rude. But as we walked, he started asking oddly specific questions. What time do you usually leave for work? Do you always park in the same spot? I brushed it off as small talk, but the unease I felt during dinner only grew. When we reached my car, he lingered, leaning against the door as if waiting for something. I thanked him for the evening and said goodnight, but he didn't move. Instead, he asked, mind if I come over? Just to hang out a bit more. I politely declined, saying I had an early morning, but his smile faded. Come on, he said, his tone suddenly sharper. It's not like I'm a stranger. I repeated that I wasn't comfortable, and his expression darkened. Without saying another word, he walked off, disappearing into the shadows of the parking lot. The next day, I couldn't shake the weird vibe from the night before. Then things took a turn. When I got home from work, there was a note on my door. "You're even prettier in person." My stomach dropped. I locked the door and double-checked all the windows, trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence. But over the next few days, I noticed small things, shadows moving outside my window at night, my trash cans being moved, a car I didn't recognize parked across the street for hours. I reported the incidents to the police, but without any solid evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Then one evening I saw him. Dave was standing across the street from my apartment, watching me through the window. When our eyes met, he gave me a slow, chilling smile before walking away. That was the final straw. I packed my things and moved out within the week, not leaving a forwarding address or telling anyone where I was going. Looking back, I still get chills thinking about how close I came to something far worse. I'd thought Dave was just a friendly, caring guy, but his obsession was anything but innocent. It was a lesson I'll never forget. Always trust your instincts and never ignore the red flags. After months of swiping left and right, I finally matched with someone who seemed different. His name was Eric, and he wasn't like the usual profiles filled with mirror selfies or vague one-liners. Eric was articulate and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that made me laugh out loud. His profile mentioned he loved art galleries, long hikes, and cooking elaborate meals. He seemed perfect, or at least as close to perfect as anyone online could be. We messaged back and forth for a few weeks before deciding to meet. Eric suggested a casual date at a nearby cafe that was known for its cozy vibe. The idea of meeting him made me nervous but excited, and I spent too much time picking out the right outfit. The day of the date, Eric showed up on time, looking just like his pictures, average height, lean, with dark hair and a confident but not overbearing demeanor. He greeted me warmly, and as we started talking, I felt myself relaxing. He was engaging, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. About halfway through the date, however, I noticed something strange. Eric kept glancing over my shoulder, as though watching someone or something behind me. When I turned to look, I didn't see anything unusual, just other patrons enjoying their coffee. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said quickly, smiling in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I just thought I saw someone I knew. Don't worry about it." I brushed it off, but as the date went on, I noticed his glances becoming more frequent. It made me feel uneasy, but I chalked it up to nerves. When we finished our drinks, Eric offered to walk me to my car. I hesitated for a moment before agreeing, figuring it was a polite gesture. As we walked to the parking lot, he started asking odd questions. "So, do you live alone? Do you have a lot of friends in the area?" I gave vague answers, not wanting to share too much personal information. His tone was casual, but the questions felt invasive. When we reached my car, Eric lingered, leaning against the hood. "I had a really nice time," he said, his voice soft. "We should do this again soon." I nodded politely, trying to end the conversation, but he didn't move. Instead, he leaned closer, his expression intense. "You know, I feel like we have a real connection. Like something deeper." Alarm bells started ringing in my head. The date had been pleasant, but we'd only just met. His declaration felt premature and a little unsettling. "I think we should take things slow," I said carefully, trying not to provoke him. Eric's smile faltered, and for a split second, I thought I saw frustration flicker across his face. But then he stepped back, his smile returning. "Of course," he said. "I didn't mean to rush things." I got in my car and drove away, relieved to be out of the situation. But that relief was short-lived. Over the next few days, Eric started bombarding me with messages. Long paragraphs about how much he enjoyed our date, how he couldn't stop thinking about me, how we were meant to be together. When I didn't respond immediately, his tone shifted. He started sending passive-aggressive messages. "I guess you're too busy for me. I thought we had something special." Then, one evening, I came home to find a bouquet of flowers on my doorstep. There was no note, but I had a sinking feeling they were from Eric. I messaged him to ask if he had sent them, and he replied almost instantly, "Yes, I thought they'd brighten your day. Did you like them?" I told him I didn't feel comfortable with him showing up unannounced, and that's when his true colors came out. He sent a flurry of angry messages, accusing me of leading him on and calling me ungrateful. The next day, I noticed a car parked down the street from my apartment. It was the same car Eric had described as his in our messages. My heart pounded as I realized he was watching me. I called a friend and stayed at her place for a few nights, eventually blocking Eric's number and deleting my dating profile. I never saw him again, but for weeks I felt like I was being followed. Looking back, I realize how important it is to trust your gut. Eric seemed perfect at first, but the red flags were there all along. I'll never ignore them again. Would you like me to expand further or adjust this? I met Rachel on a dating app, and from the start, she seemed almost too good to be true. She was smart, funny, and adventurous. Her photos were stunning: beach vacations, hiking trips, and even a few with her holding trophies from martial arts competitions. She was like a dream. When we started chatting, she was incredibly engaging. She asked about my hobbies, shared hilarious anecdotes from her own life, and always left me eager for the next message. It wasn't long before we decided to meet in person. We arranged to meet at a trendy bar downtown. When I arrived, she was already there, sipping on a cocktail. In person, Rachel was even more charismatic. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and before I knew it, hours had passed. At the end of the night, we made plans for a second date. Everything seemed perfect. The next few weeks were like something out of a romantic comedy. Rachel and I went on long walks, tried new restaurants, and even went rock climbing. Her idea, of course. She was so full of energy, and always had a plan for our next adventure. But as we spent more time together, I started noticing small inconsistencies in her stories. One evening, she mentioned growing up in a small town in Vermont. A week later, she casually said she had lived in New York City her entire life. When I asked about the discrepancy, she laughed it off, saying she'd lived in Vermont for a short time before moving to the city. It didn't quite add up, but I didn't push it. Then, there were the constant interruptions. Rachel was always on her phone, texting someone or answering calls she said were work-related. She claimed to be a freelance writer, but her schedule was chaotic. She'd disappear for hours, sometimes days, without much explanation. The turning point came when I accidentally saw a message pop up on her phone while we were watching a movie at her place. It was from someone named Mike and read, "Can't wait to see you tonight, babe." My stomach sank. I tried to play it cool and asked casually, "Who's Mike?" Rachel froze for a moment before laughing. "Oh, he's just a friend from my martial arts class. We're working on a project together." Her explanation didn't sit right with me, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Over the next few days, my suspicions grew. I started noticing more things, like how Rachel never introduced me to her friends or talked about her family. One night, I decided to do something I wasn't proud of. I looked her up online. What I found left me speechless. Rachel wasn't a freelance writer. She was listed as a marketing executive at a major firm, something she'd never mentioned. But that wasn't the worst part. A quick search of her name led me to a wedding announcement from 2 years ago. Rachel was married. My heart raced as I scrolled through the photos of her smiling with a man I didn't recognize. The article described them as a power couple, with quotes about their plans for the future. I felt sick. The next time we met, I confronted her. "Rachel, are you married?" Her face went pale. For a moment, I thought she might deny it. But then she sighed and said, "It's complicated." She admitted that she was still technically married, but claimed they were separated and living very different lives. She insisted her feelings for me were real and begged me not to leave. I didn't know what to believe. Part of me wanted to trust her, but another part of me felt completely betrayed. In the end, I decided I couldn't continue seeing someone who hadn't been honest with me from the start. Walking away from Rachel was one of the hardest things I've ever done. She seemed perfect on the surface, but beneath the charm was a web of lies. It was a harsh reminder that sometimes people aren't who they appear to be. I met Chloe through a friend of a friend. She was funny, smart, and had this magnetic energy that drew people in. We hit it off immediately, and after a few weeks of texting and phone calls, we finally arranged to meet in person. We decided on a quiet restaurant. Nothing too fancy, but enough to create a nice atmosphere for a first date. Chloe was running late, but I didn't mind. I was early, as usual, so I settled into a cozy booth and started going over the menu. When she finally walked in, I couldn't help but smile. Chloe had an effortless beauty about her. and she walked up to the table with a friendly smile and a casual air. The first few minutes of the date went smoothly. We talked about our interests, hobbies, and past experiences. But then something strange happened. As the night wore on, Chloe became increasingly silent. It was almost like she had retreated into herself. At first, I thought it was just nerves. Some people take a little time to open up on a first date, and I could respect that. But as time passed, Chloe didn't seem to be saying much at all. It was like I was talking to a wall. I tried to steer the conversation to lighthearted topics, but the responses I received were short and disconnected. By the time the main course arrived, I was starting to feel uncomfortable. I had tried everything, from talking about our mutual interests to joking about silly things, but nothing seemed to break the silence. Chloe barely looked at me and instead focused on her phone, occasionally checking her messages. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "You seem a little distant." Chloe looked up at me, blinking as if she had just realized I was there. "Oh, sorry," she said quickly. "I'm just really tired. Been a long day." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. We finished our meals in near silence, and when the check came, Chloe didn't reach for her wallet. Normally, I'd be fine with paying, but the way she acted made me feel like I was being taken advantage of. I paid the bill, and we left the restaurant in a heavy silence. On the walk back to her car, I tried one last time to ask if something was wrong. "Chloe, seriously, are you okay? You don't seem like yourself tonight." She stopped in her tracks and turned to face me. There was a strange look in her eyes. She almost looked angry, but also cold. "I'm just fine," she said flatly, then added, "Maybe you're the one who's not okay." I didn't know how to respond to that. Was she mad at me for something? We reached her car, and she immediately unlocked the door, getting inside without another word. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. "Chloe, She slammed the door shut, cutting me off. "Good night," she said, her voice as cold as ice. I watched her drive off into the night, completely confused. What had just happened? Over the next few days, Chloe's behavior became even more erratic. She wouldn't return my calls, and whenever I texted her, the responses were curt and disconnected. At one point, I reached out to her friend, hoping to understand what was going on. Her friend, Karen, was more than happy to tell me the truth. Apparently, Chloe had been seeing someone else before I came into the picture. They had a complicated history, and Chloe wasn't quite over that person. But the part that stuck with me the most was when Karen mentioned that Chloe had a history of ghosting people. "She's done this before," Karen said. "She gets distant, and then she just disappears." I was shocked. For a moment, I had thought maybe I had done something wrong, but now I realized that Chloe had been playing games from the start. The mixed signals, the cold treatment, it was all part of a pattern. I tried to reach out one last time, but by that point, Chloe had blocked me on all social media platforms. The experience left me with a bitter taste in my mouth. Chloe had been one of the most unpredictable people I'd ever met. What started as a seemingly normal date turned into a night filled with confusion and silence. And in the end, I realized that some people enjoy playing mind games, leaving others caught up in their unpredictable behavior. It was one of those days when everything seems to fall into place. I had been chatting with Claire for a couple of weeks on a dating app, and everything felt right. We shared common interests, and our conversations were always smooth and engaging. Her profile pictures showed a beautiful, confident woman with a genuine smile. She seemed perfect. We decided to meet at a cozy cafe downtown, a popular spot for casual dates. I arrived a little early, nervous but excited. After a few minutes, Claire walked in. She looked exactly like her photos, and for a brief second, I couldn't believe my luck. She was stunning. She had that radiance that makes you forget about everything else around you. She greeted me with a warm smile, and we sat down to chat. At first, everything seemed perfect. We talked about our jobs, our favorite movies, and even some deeper topics like our childhoods and future plans. Claire laughed at all the right moments, and I felt like I had finally found someone who could keep up with my sense of humor. But soon, things began to take an unsettling turn. It started with her asking a lot of personal questions, which seemed innocent at first. "So, what kind of car do you drive?" she asked, leaning in a bit too close. I thought it was a little odd, but I didn't think much of it. As we continued talking, Claire became more intense. Her eyes, which had initially seemed warm and inviting, started to look almost calculating. She would stare at me for a little too long after every question, as if waiting for me to give her the perfect answer. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself I was just overthinking things. But then she started talking about my past relationships. So, how long did your last relationship last? Was it serious? Why did it end? Her questions weren't casual anymore. They were pointed, like she was trying to figure something out. At first, I thought maybe she was just curious, but the more she pressed, the more uncomfortable I became. I tried to change the subject, but Claire seemed to have a way of steering the conversation back to my personal life. She even asked me about my family, my friends, and even my exes. What was she like? What went wrong with her? She asked, almost too eagerly. At this point, I began to feel like I was being interrogated, but I didn't know how to get out of it without seeming rude. She was so charming, and part of me wanted to keep things going, to see where this date could go. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was off. I decided to take a different approach and asked about her past, trying to shift the focus back on her. She hesitated for a moment, then smiled. Oh, well, my last relationship was a mess. I don't really like talking about it. It's better if we just focus on the future, don't you think? She didn't seem upset, but there was something in her tone that made me feel uneasy. As the date went on, Claire started getting more intense, almost obsessive. She started mentioning how perfect we seemed together, how we had so much in common, and how she could see us having a future together. I tried to keep the conversation light, but she was relentless. At one point, she leaned in close and whispered, I've been talking to some friends about you, and they all agree that we're a perfect match. You're exactly what I've been looking for. That's when it hit me. Claire wasn't just interested in me. She had already built up this entire idea of us in her mind before we'd even met in person. She had this obsessive need to make everything fit perfectly. It was almost as if she had created this idealized version of me based on everything she had learned from our conversations and my profile, and now she was trying to make it a reality. But the more she talked, the more I realized I wasn't the one in control of the situation. She was. Things took a darker turn when Claire started making comments about my future without even asking for my input. Once we're together, we could get a place together. Maybe even move to a new city. We'll travel the world. It's going to be amazing, she said, her voice sweet but oddly forceful. I laughed awkwardly, unsure of how to respond. But she didn't stop. I already found a couple of apartments we could move into. I looked online, and there are some amazing options. I know it's fast, but we just know each other so well already, don't we? My stomach dropped. I had known Claire for less than 3 hours, and she was already planning our life together. It felt suffocating. I tried to excuse myself, saying I had to leave early, but she insisted on walking me to my car. There was no way out. As we stood outside the cafe, Claire reached out and grabbed my hand. I'm really glad we met, she said, her eyes locking with mine. I know we're going to be great together. Her grip on my hand tightened, and I could feel the intensity in her touch. I pulled my hand away gently and said, Look, Claire, I think you're a great person, but I don't think we're a match. Her expression shifted in an instant. It was as if the friendly, charming woman I had been speaking to was suddenly replaced by someone else. What do you mean? She asked, her voice suddenly cold. We're perfect for each other. You're just scared, aren't you? I quickly backed away. No, it's not that. I just think we want different things. She didn't say anything else. She just stood there, staring at me with those cold eyes as I got into my car and drove away. I didn't hear from Claire again after that night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something much darker. It wasn't just her obsession with me, it was her inability to see me as a person, to treat me as an individual. To her, I was just the next step in her plan to make her fantasy of the perfect relationship a reality. And that's what made her dangerous. I had been single for a few months and decided to give online dating a shot. After some casual scrolling through profiles, I came across Mia. She had that perfect mix of beauty and intellect, someone who could challenge me and make me laugh. Her messages were witty and engaging, and I felt like I'd finally found someone I could really connect with. We agreed to meet at a small Italian restaurant one evening, and when I saw her walk in, I was pleasantly surprised. She looked just like her photos, gorgeous, confident, and radiant. She smiled when she saw me, and we immediately fell into an easy conversation. We talked about our favorite books, movies, and the places we wanted to travel to. For the first time in a while, I was genuinely enjoying myself on a date. As the evening went on, things took a turn, but I didn't notice it at first. Mia was charming, but as the conversation deepened, I began to feel like she was subtly steering it in strange directions. She asked about my ex-girlfriends, and at first I didn't think much of it. "What went wrong with your last relationship?" she asked casually. I explained that things simply didn't work out, no hard feelings, just grew apart. She seemed satisfied with my answer, but then asked again, "And your first girlfriend? What happened there?" I felt a little uncomfortable but answered, "Well, it was high school. We were young and had different paths." She nodded but lingered on the topic, asking for more details I hadn't expected. I tried changing the subject, but Mia was quick to bring it back up. After a while, I noticed that she seemed to be mimicking my behavior. If I shifted in my seat, she did the same. If I laughed at a joke, she laughed just a little louder. I chalked it up to coincidence or maybe us just getting along so well, but the longer we spoke, the more unsettling it became. It was like she was studying me, mirroring my every move. When the date ended, Mia walked me to my car and gave me a lingering hug. "I had a great time," she said, her voice soft and warm. I smiled, still not quite sure how I felt, but I did enjoy her company, even if there were some odd moments. I went home that night thinking it was just first date jitters, and that maybe I was overthinking things. The next morning, I woke up to a text from her. "Good morning. I hope you had a restful night," it read, followed by a series of heart emojis. I thought it was a little much for a first date, but I responded, feeling positive about the connection we had. But then came another text, and another. Throughout the day, my phone buzzed constantly with messages from Mia. I tried to keep up with the conversation, but it became overwhelming quickly. She asked about everything I was doing, where I was, who I was with, and even what I was eating. I didn't want to be rude, but I felt smothered. By the evening, I started noticing a pattern. Mia was texting me at odd hours, late into the night, well past midnight. I tried to ignore it, but it became hard to avoid. I received messages about things I didn't even remember mentioning, like my favorite childhood TV shows or my preference for morning coffee. "Hey, I remember you said you liked iced coffee. I just got some. We're so similar." Smiley face. She texted at 1:30 a.m. At first, I thought maybe she was just really eager, but after a few more late-night texts, I started feeling uncomfortable. I tried to respond less frequently, but the texts didn't stop. The following day, I decided to pull back a bit. I sent her a polite message saying I was swamped with work and couldn't keep up with texting as much. To my surprise, Mia responded with a single text, "It's okay. I'll be here whenever you want to talk." I didn't reply. I wasn't ready to confront her, but I could feel the intensity of her messages starting to weigh on me. The next morning, things took a darker turn. I woke up to a message at 7 a.m. "I've been thinking about you all night. I really hope we can hang out soon. I want to get to know you better. We're perfect for each other." I had only known Mia for a couple of days. I thought that was a bit too much, too fast, so I decided to respond with, "I think we should take it slow. I don't want to rush anything." Mia didn't respond immediately, but when she did, it was more unnerving than ever. "Don't worry, we'll get there. I already know everything about you, though. I've been reading through your social media, and I think I have a good idea of who you really are." I felt a chill run down my spine. She was crossing boundaries I didn't even know existed. My social media was public, but the idea that she had gone through it so thoroughly made me feel exposed. How did she even have time to look through everything? I didn't know how to respond, so I simply ignored her for the rest of the day. But that night, it got worse. I received another message at midnight. "Why are you ignoring me? I know what you're doing. It's okay. I'll give you some space, but you can't avoid me forever." This was the breaking point. I blocked Mia on my phone and social media. But the next day, I started receiving text messages from a different number, which seemed to be a private or unlisted one. The same strange messages appeared. "I see you're on your lunch break. I know what you're wearing today." I was terrified. It felt like Mia had become obsessed with me, almost like she was watching my every move. I didn't know what to do. She had found ways to contact me even after I blocked her, and now I was constantly on edge, wondering when the next message would come. The final straw came a week later when I found a note under my door at home. It simply read, "I told you we were perfect together. I'll be waiting." I didn't know what to do at that point. I moved to a different city shortly after, hoping to leave everything behind. But even now, I'm not sure if Mia ever stopped watching. And honestly, I still wonder, did she always know where I was, or had I been unknowingly giving her all the information she needed? All I know is that the person I thought was just an overly eager date turned out to be something far darker. I haven't dated since. It had been a long week of work, and I was tired of the usual routine. A few friends of mine had been talking about a dating app that was gaining popularity, so I decided to give it a shot. It seemed harmless enough, a way to meet new people, and maybe find someone interesting. I set up my profile, included some pictures, and filled out the usual information. After a couple of days of chatting with some people, I thought I'd found a decent match, Ryan. Ryan didn't have a lot of pictures on his profile, but he did have one that stood out. It was a black and white photo of him standing near a lake, looking off into the distance. There was something mysterious about it, but it intrigued me. His bio was short but sweet, just looking for someone to share adventures with. I love exploring new places. His profile seemed normal at first, and we quickly started chatting. His messages were kind, and we had some really great conversations about books, travel, and our mutual love for the outdoors. He was easy to talk to, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. We agreed to meet up at a coffee shop one afternoon. I was a bit nervous, but I was excited to finally meet the person I had been talking to for days. When I arrived, I looked around but didn't see anyone who matched the photo Ryan had sent me. I assumed he hadn't arrived yet, so I sat down and checked my phone. To my surprise, I got a message from Ryan almost immediately. "Hey, I'm here. I'm the guy sitting near the back, wearing a black hoodie." I looked around the coffee shop, scanning the crowd, but I didn't see anyone who seemed to match the description. I replied, "I don't see you. Are you sure you're here?" Ryan quickly responded, "Yeah, I'm definitely here. Just look a little closer." I glanced around again, feeling a little confused, but still, I couldn't see him. Finally, after what seemed like a few awkward minutes, I decided to just stand up and walk over to the back of the shop. To my surprise, there was no one there. I sent him another message. "Are you sure you're here?" He replied instantly, "Look at the door." I'm standing right outside. I walked to the door and peered through the glass, but I didn't see anyone. My heart was starting to race. This was getting really strange. I tried to call him, but the call went straight to voicemail. Something didn't feel right. That's when I received a new message, and my hands went cold when I saw the text. "I see you through the window. You're looking in the wrong place." I froze. I looked up, scanning the street outside, but still I couldn't see him. My instincts told me to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I had been talking to this guy for days, and despite the strange feeling creeping up on me, I didn't want to be rude or dismissive. Just as I was about to sit back down, I received another message. "You're not looking hard enough." "I'm right behind you." My blood ran cold. I turned around quickly, but no one was there. The shop was full of people, but none of them looked familiar. I felt exposed, like someone was watching me, but I couldn't tell who. I decided that enough was enough. I texted him, "I'm leaving." This isn't funny. Ryan didn't reply for a few minutes, and I decided to make a run for it. I grabbed my things and quickly headed for the door. As I stepped outside, my phone buzzed in my hand. Another message from Ryan, "Don't go." "I'm right behind you." I didn't dare look back. I practically ran to my car, my mind racing. I locked the door, started the engine, and drove away as quickly as I could. But the entire drive home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. I couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan was out there somewhere. When I finally made it home, I sat down and tried to process what had just happened. I blocked Ryan on the app immediately, but the weird messages didn't stop. Over the next few days, I received text messages from a number I didn't recognize. Each message contained one simple sentence. "I saw you." The messages didn't stop for weeks. Even though I'd blocked the number, somehow, the texts kept coming. "I know what you're doing. I'm watching, and we will meet again soon." I started to wonder if Ryan had been using a different app to track me, or if maybe I had been talking to someone who wasn't even Ryan at all. I had no way of knowing how he'd gotten my number or how he knew where I was, but the messages made it clear. This wasn't a coincidence. I still get the occasional text from an unknown number. It's been months, but I can't get over the unease. The whole situation left me wondering, who was Ryan really? Was he just a guy with an unsettling obsession, or was he someone who knew more about me than I ever realized? I still don't have answers, but I'm done with online dating for good.